upper room. We're so glad to be with you. It is said that confession is good for the soul, and so I have a couple things to confess to you. Very deep, troubling things to confess to you from the depths of my dark heart. First of all, you know how those of us who are old geezers grew up watching afternoon TV shows? There were a couple shows growing up that I absolutely detested. I don't think I've ever told anybody this, so you're getting this deep, dark secret from me right here, right now. Number one, Gilligan's Island. Detested it. Why? Not because of any single character, although most of them were annoying, but because you knew after watching it for a couple years, they're never getting off this blasted island. It's hopeless. Same old thing. Every time they try, they'll never get off. The second TV show that I detested was the cartoon Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, for the same reason. That mangy coyote, which they're all mangy, is never going to catch the Roadrunner. No matter how many Acme products from Amazon he ordered, it never would work. It would always blow up in his face. A little trivia question, by the way. See if you know this one. Do you know what the E in his middle name stood for? The E stood for Ethelbert. Ethelbert. I bet you didn't know that. See, you're always learning something in the upper room. Okay, so what did I dislike about it? Again, there's no way. Foiled again. There's no way the coyote is ever going to win. I bring that up to you because that has to be somewhat like what the Jewish leaders in dealing with Paul are beginning to feel like. We are never going to win this thing. We're never going to get him. The same thing with Jesus. They always tried to trap him and catch him, and he was like the Roadrunner. They never could do it. They finally thought they had when they got him on the cross, but guess what? He rises from the dead. Problem is not solved. I bring those up because they have got to be feeling like they're watching Wile E. Coyote and Gilligan's Island, and that will continue in this text today. Confession number 2. And I've mentioned this before, but I love conspiracy theories. Okay. So that leads us to the discussion question, which is your favorite conspiracy theory? Have a fun discussion. There are so many to choose from, aren't there? How about the foreknowledge of Pearl Harbor being bombed? And some say there was foreknowledge of the World Trade Centers being flown into by hijackers. Some people say that there was foreknowledge of that. How about the fact that some people believe the Twin Towers came down because they imploded from explosive devices? Possibly. My personal favorite is the Kennedy assassination. You simply can't convince me that there were only 3 bullets and they all came from behind a lone gunman. There were at least 5, and some came from the front, and I can get into that with you, but that's one of my favorite conspiracies that I love to look into. The most recent, of course, is the whole COVID scare and the injections that followed that up, and the idea that that came from some cave in China with bats. We all understand now that the United States, it's been proven that the United States has wherefore art thou? It has now been proven that the United States has bioweapon laboratories all over the world, like over 120 of them. 40 of them were on the Ukraine-Russian border. And we've just acknowledged that, even though that's what Putin said. I'm invading partly to get rid of those. Okay, so those are my favorite conspiracy theories. We could go on and on and on with Operation Paperclip, Operation Mockingbird, and MK Ultra operations, PSYOPs. We can go into all those, but the point, again, is it shows up in our story today, in Acts 23. I'm amazed that some people look at the book of Acts and say, oh, it's so boring. It's just, it's just the story of the early church. Are you kidding me right now? Are you serious? The text today in Acts 23 reads like a spy novel, for crying out loud. Have you noticed it? I can't wait to get into it with you. And so yes, Paul was in Jerusalem, and he tried to prove himself to the Jewish Christians there at the temple, and that turned into a riot. Not a riot like a great time, like, a real riot. And then it happened again with the mob trying to pull him apart, and he was saved by the Roman commander. And then the Roman commander, after saving him, says, let's get to the bottom of this. You can talk to the mob, but ultimately I'm going to take you to the Sanhedrin court and see what it is they have against you. And remember, the Spirit flows through Paul, and he gets them to turn on each other. In the last lesson, the Pharisees and the scribes turn on each other, but in the end, same result. They turn on Paul and they try to tear him to pieces. So that's where we are. The commander now is thinking, this can't go on. I mean, I can't have this Roman citizen, which he knows he is by now, being killed in my city. That does not look good on my resume. So now what happens next? Well, he doesn't just simply put him on a bus, but we're going to find out what happens. And it's about, again, the Jewish leaders being foiled again. It's about a conspiracy theory, and it's really not a theory. It's just all kinds of fun. So open your Bibles, if you would, to Acts chapter 23. History is replete with example after example after example of the plans of man running headlong into the providence of God. And that's really what we're going to see. We're going to cover 24 verses, and only the first few verses talk about man's plans. But I think you're very familiar with man's plans. We'll get into that a little bit more later as well. But the first few verses will talk about the plans of man, and then we bump into, and not just bump into, we collide with the providence of God. And so we pick it up where Paul is sitting in a jail cell, really in protective custody. He's not arrested. They're trying to protect him from being destroyed by the Jewish mobs and the Jewish leaders. And I want to propose to you that as he sits there overnight, he's an expert in the Old Testament, right? He was a Pharisee. I want to believe he is probably thinking or recalling the journey of David. Because David's journey, if we look at it, is very similar to Paul's journey. You might remember that David was entertaining King Saul when King Saul lost his mind and tried to kill him. Then King Saul kicks him out of the palace, evicts him from the palace. Then he has him go to the Philistine war, hoping he dies. He doesn't die. He comes back a hero of all things. Crazy Saul is not done with him yet. He hires his servants and associates to find him and murder him. When David finally gets to the throne, it gets even worse. His own son, Absalom, turns against him and starts a revolt against him to remove him from the throne. It's a constant journey of ups and downs, but being constantly hunted down and haunted by people who want to be rid of him, even though God has chosen him. That's Paul's story, right? So it makes me wonder if Paul is thinking about David and the things he wrote. For example, in Psalm chapter 56, verse 1, he writes this: "O God, have mercy on me, for people are hounding me. My foes attack me all day long. I am constantly hounded by those who slander me, and many are boldly attacking me. But when I am afraid," so he acknowledges, I am afraid at times. "But when I am afraid, I'll put my trust in you. I praise God for what he has promised. I trust in God, so why should I be afraid? What can mere mortals do to me?" Do you think maybe, just maybe, Paul is reciting that passage in his heart and mind? Because it applies to him for sure. So here we go, Acts chapter 23. I assume you're there, starting in verse 12. And again, we're looking at the plots or plans of man, first of all. "The next morning, a group of Jews got together and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. There was more than 40 of them in the conspiracy." There you have it. Okay, does this really qualify as a conspiracy? Well, let's first get the definition of a conspiracy. The definition is a secret plan by a group, that could be two or more, to do something unlawful or harmful. Well, it seems like it's starting to apply to our text. It goes on, the action of plotting or conspiring. This is a conspiracy, even by our definitions. We move on to verse 14. This gets even more interesting. They went to the leading priests and elders and told them, we have bound ourselves with an oath to eat nothing until we have killed Paul. The literal word there for we have bound ourselves to an oath is anathematized. It's the same word Paul would write down in writing to the churches in Galatia for those who are rejecting the pure gospel for something else. And he writes, may you be anathema. May you, or even an angel from heaven, if you change the gospel, be anathema. What does it mean? May I be under a curse. May you be under a curse from God. And that's what these men have pledged to. May we be under a curse. May we die if we do not kill Paul, and we will not eat or drink until we do. They're serious. These are zealots. These guys are passionate. 40 of them. Not a couple crazies. 40 of them. Are you getting the plot that's developing here? Scary stuff for Paul, right? Now look how detailed the plan that they have come up with truly is in verse 15. So they go to the high priest and the council, all right, which tells me something right away. These guys somehow heard from the council how badly they hate Paul and want to get rid of him, or else they would not have even known about Paul. They go to the high priest and the Sanhedrin and they say, so you and the high council should ask the commander, the Roman commander, to bring Paul back to the council again. Pretend you want to examine his case more fully. We will kill him on his way. We will ambush him, because they'll probably only have a guard or two. There's 40 of us. I want to ask a really obvious question here. How is it that people who claim to know God and serve God with all their heart can plot to kill somebody? Meeker gang. We have a Meeker gang that just came through. Paul will later write about this to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. Satan, who is the god of this world, little g, the god of this world, has blinded the minds. Isn't that an interesting phrase? Not blinded the eyes, but our minds can be blinded. Blinded the minds of those who don't believe. They are unable to see the glorious light of the good news. They don't understand this message about the glory of Christ, who is the exact likeness of God. Isn't that what we've said in our previous lessons in the Gospel of John, that Jesus is the exact likeness of God? He manifests God to us in a human form. Why do people do what these guys are doing? Their minds have been blinded by Satan. They can claim to know God, they can claim to live for God, to be pleasing God, but Satan still has that power over those who truly don't know Christ to blind their minds. Behind me, right?
Yeah.
So what's your name?
Braden.
Braden. Okay, I'll mention the Braden.
Alright, yeah, because I want to be in it.
You want to be in
it?
it? You don't want to be in it?
I want to be in it. Are you famous?
Not yet. I probably will never be famous.
You'll get there if I win. I'm famous.
That's true. You are famous?
Yeah.
You will be now, for sure. All right. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Yeah. That was Braden and the Meeker gang that we just talked to, and they want to be in this video. Oh, so good to be back with you after talking to Braden and the gang from Meeker. That's where we're at. We'll talk more about it later. Okay, so that's the plan of man. Okay, man's plans are always going on, right? And their plan is a good one, they're sure of it. Now we come to the rest of the text and the bulk of the text, and it's all about God's providence. So just like we did with conspiracy, let's start with what providence is. Make sure we're on the same page. Providence is the protective care of God as a spiritual power, timely preparation for future eventualities or events. Okay, it's his protection. It is something only God can do. It's supernatural. Again, hearkening back to David, 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 14. David now stayed in the strongholds of the wilderness and in the hill country of Ziph. Saul hunted him day after day. Watch this line. But God did not let Saul find him. That's God's providence. Chapter 23, verse 26. Saul and David were now on opposite sides of a mountain. Just as Saul and his men began to close in on David and his men, an urgent message reached Saul that the Philistines were raiding Israel again. The timing is incredible. So Saul quit chasing David and returned to the fight with the Philistines. Ever since that time, the place where David was camped has been called the Rock of Escape. He escaped, again, because he's so elusive? No, because God intervened. The late pastor and author John MacArthur puts it this way: God's providence is his sovereign control over and ordering of natural circumstances to accomplish his will. There are natural things going on around us, and he takes control of them to accomplish his will. He has promised. Remember, Jesus came to Paul and said, I promise you, I guarantee you, is the way we looked at it, that you will be my witness in Rome as you have been here. It doesn't end here, Paul. How will God pull this off? We're about to see. Verse 16. You know the plan, you know the plot, you know about the ambush, you know about the assassins. Verse 16. But Paul's nephew, we didn't even know Paul had a nephew. This is the only time in Scripture we even know that Paul had relatives. And right there in Jerusalem, what are the odds that his nephew's hanging out and he's close enough, at least at the same tavern, to overhear about this conspiracy? But Paul's nephew, his sister's son, in case you don't know what a nephew is, Luke is so informative, he heard of their plan and went to the fortress and told Paul. Paul obviously is not in jail or no one could visit him. He's just, again, in protective custody. His nephew knows he's there, and he tells him about this plot. Paul called for one of the Roman officers and said, take this young man to the commander. He has something important to tell him. So the officer did, explaining, Paul the prisoner called me over and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you. The commander took his hand, led him aside, and asked, what is it you want to tell me? This tells you about Paul's credibility with the commander, right? Most commanders might say, I don't have time to talk to this kid. He says, okay, if Paul says I need to hear him, I need to hear him. Pulls him aside. Paul's nephew told him, some Jews are going to ask you to bring Paul before the high council tomorrow, pretending they want to get some more information, but don't do it. There are more than 40 men hiding along the way to ambush him, ready to ambush him. They have vowed not to eat or drink anything until they have killed him. They are ready now, just waiting for your consent. Don't do it. I love Paul's nephew. Isn't he great? We go on to verse 22. Don't let anyone know you told me this, the commander warned the young man. See how the plot just thickens now? All kinds of stuff's going on. And if you think the book of Acts is blah, you're not reading what I'm reading. And so the commander says, shh, go quietly, don't say a word to anyone. Okay, verse 23. Then the commander called 2 of his officers and ordered, get 200 soldiers ready to leave for Caesarea. Well, where's Caesarea? I'll show you a map. It's 65 miles away, west and up the coast. It's where the Roman government had a seat there in that region. And the governor, Felix, is living there. So he says, we're going to send him to Caesarea, not by bus, but get 200 guys to take him. Take him at 9 o'clock tonight. Also, take 200 spearmen and 70 mounted troops. I don't know if you've been doing the math. I'm not great at math, but I had to go back and use all my fingers and toes. I think that amounts to 470 men are going to accompany Paul. Boy, does he have credibility with this commander, right? 470 men. You got spearsmen and you got guys on horses, a cavalry, and all kinds of things going on here. Verse 24, he says, provide horses for Paul to ride. This needs to be quick. He can't be walking slowly and we have an ambush. Give him a horse to ride and get him safely to Governor Felix. And then he writes this letter to the governor, which is what you would have to do to explain, why are you sending me this prisoner? I need to explain myself, is what the commander says. And now we learn his name. And it begins this way. From Claudius, that's a Roman name that he took most likely when he bought his citizenship in Rome, and he most likely took on that name to honor the Emperor Claudius. So from Claudius, Lysias. Lysias is a Greek name. It's his Greek surname. It tells that he is a free man as a Greek. To His Excellency Governor Felix, greetings. I guess it wasn't Christmas, or it would have been season's greetings. He goes on, verse 27. This man was seized by some Jews, and they were about to kill him. When I arrived with the troops, when I learned that he was a Roman citizen, I removed him to safety. Here's what I love about this. You know what's missing? He forgot to mention that he was going to have him flogged, which would have got him in trouble. And so he skips over that little detail. I love that about this guy. Then I took him to the high council to try to learn the basis of the accusations against him. I soon discovered the charge was something regarding the religious law. Certainly nothing worthy of imprisonment or death. He adds his 2 cents. I'm telling you, from my perspective, there's nothing going on here. He does not deserve what they are trying to charge him with. But when I was informed of a plot to kill him, I immediately sent him on to you. I have told his accusers to bring their charges before you. Okay, that's the letter. Verse 31, so that night, at 9 o'clock that night, in the cover of darkness, this is big deal stuff. This is true spy stuff. As ordered, the soldiers took Paul as far as Antipatris. Antipatris is about halfway to Caesarea, about 35 miles. They stopped there for the night. It's a great place to stop. Great hotels, casinos, the whole thing. Okay, they stopped there for the night. There's another reason they stopped there, and we're about to find out, but that's where they stopped for the night. They returned to the fortress the next morning while the mounted troops took Paul on to Caesarea. Okay, so this little town, this Las Vegas in the middle of the desert, is right on the border of Judea and Samaria. So they believe by now he will be safe. They're getting out of Judea. So they send a bunch of them back. So only the mounted troops, the soldiers on horseback, took him the rest of the way to Caesarea. They believed he's safe by now. When they arrived in Caesarea, they presented Paul and the letter to Governor Felix. He read it and then asked Paul what province he was from. Cilicia, Paul answers him. Then Felix the governor says, I will hear your case myself when your accusers arrive. The governor told him that. Then the governor ordered him kept in the prison of Herod's headquarters. This now marks the beginning of several Roman trials. And that brings us to our location. We're back in Meeker, Colorado, a little itty-bitty town. And we were here at the cemetery just a couple lessons ago. We were looking for a courthouse in front of which we could film. There are a lot of courthouses in western Colorado, but we figured this was the quietest courthouse. It's Juneteenth here in our country, so we figured it'd be really quiet here, but we're in Meeker, so they don't celebrate it, evidently. Everything's open, so we have a lot of distractions going on, but that's okay, we're pressing forward. We're in front of this courthouse because it is a reminder that it's a place like this where Paul lands and he will go on trial. There's something even more about this courthouse. My great-granddad was a judge in this courthouse. I was told he was on the 2nd floor, his office was anyway, and he was here for at least a decade, if not more, as a judge. My great-granddad Aldrich. Ironically, the house that he and my great-grandmother lived in is across the street. He didn't have much of a commute to work. Anyhow, I didn't know him. He died when I was very, very young. But that's why we're here. It's time for judgment for Paul from the Roman point of view. Now it makes perfect sense why Paul later would write to the church in Philippi, Philippians chapter 4, verse 5, let everyone see your gentleness. He's been in a war, man. He's been hunted. And now he's talking about being gentle? How's that possible? The Lord is near. That is true. That's a guarantee. For those of us who given our life to Jesus, he is near to us all the time. The Lord is near. You do not need to be anxious about anything. See why he says that? He goes on to say, because the Lord is near to us who know him, the peace of Christ surrounds our hearts and mind in Christ Jesus. Again, that word is beautiful. Guards means a garrison around the fort. His peace is a garrison around the fort of our hearts and minds. See how Paul could write that and say, I know, I've been there, and I know how this works. And so what we're seeing here obviously is God's providence at work. And I was thinking about other times, and God's word is filled with examples of God's providence. We've talked about Elijah and how God provided for him, watched over him, kept him safe. There's another one that came to mind this week when Christy and I were talking about the subject of the 10 plagues in Egypt. It was when God chose Moses, if you remember, to go into Egypt and free the Israelites from the Pharaoh and the Egyptians, because they'd been slaves there for over 400 years. And it says that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. There's a whole lot to that, and that'll be part of a discussion question in a moment. But beyond that, I want to do a quick dive, I mean really quick, of the 10 plagues, because there's something that stuck out to us as we read back through the 10 plagues. We start with the first one, which was turning the water to blood. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine turning on your faucet and blood comes out? Getting in the shower and blood comes down? Can you imagine going fishing and all of a sudden nothing but blood? That's the first one. It gets Pharaoh's attention, certainly gets the attention of the Egyptians, right? It'd get our attention. But remember, God has hardened his heart. So although he thinks this is strange, he doesn't do anything about it. You can't take your people with you. The second plague is frogs everywhere. I don't know if you like frogs or not, but most people don't. Can you imagine them being everywhere? And again, God is showing his sovereignty over nature. The third one is lice. Have you ever had a lice problem? This is a lice problem. Finding lice in your hair is not a problem. This is a lice problem because God tells Aaron to put his staff down on the ground, strike the ground, and all the sand, all the dust, all the dirt turn to lice. Can you fathom that? That's a lice problem. Now we come to really the hinge in these plagues, and it's the fourth plague. And for the fourth plague, we come upon flies everywhere. I hate flies. We have fly fans to keep the flies away. You could not buy enough fly fans to keep this number of flies away. But here's what I want you to know about it. I'll read it to you from Exodus chapter 8, verse 22. God declares, "But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen." Why the land of Goshen? Because that is where my people live, so that no swarms of flies will be found there. We see a shift. For the first 3 plagues, the Israelites experience the same thing the Egyptians do. But in the fourth plague, there's a shift. That passage goes on to say, "Then you will know that I, the Lord, am in this land. I will make a distinction between my people and your people. This sign will take place tomorrow." A distinction, discussion question. It's got 3 parts to it. Number 1, so you'll have to pause for a long time on this one. Number 1, why do you think it is that God hardened Pharaoh's heart? Number 2, why do you think it is that the Israelites had to experience the first 3 plagues? Number 3, why do you think it is that they didn't have to experience the last 7 plagues? Really interesting conversation, right? Well, I've got my ideas, but we're moving on. Number 5 plague was the death of the livestock. All livestock died immediately. Number 6 was boils. The magicians before Pharaoh couldn't even stand before Pharaoh because they broke out in boils. Number 7 was hail, and the hail came at such a torrent pace that it destroyed every living thing. In case anything lived beyond that, the 8th plague was locusts, and they ate the rest of what hadn't been destroyed by the hail. Number 9, darkness. This is really interesting. Can you imagine the entire country? And by the way, we've talked about this before. In those days, it seems that what we see as the country of Egypt was just a piece of what Egypt was then. It is believed that Egypt was the entire African continent. Can you imagine the entire continent going dark? Except for in the homes of the Israelites. Is God making a statement or what? Is that foreshadowing or what? And finally to the 10th and the most well-known plague, and that is the death of the firstborn, which would not apply to the Israelites, who, providing they would put the blood of the lamb on their doorposts, and the angel of death would pass over them. It was this final plague that finally got the hardened heart of Pharaoh to give in and let them go. By the way, earlier in the plague sequence, he had said, I'll let you go worship, but only your men. And Moses said, no, not just our men. We all go as families. There's a whole lot there, right? But what do you see? Do you not see the providence of God in so many ways, so many facets, taking the natural order of life in this world and reconstructing it so he can accomplish his will? Isn't it amazing? Okay, so what we've seen is that the plan of man collides with the providence of God. What do we do with that? Last discussion question. What is it about the plans of man right now in our world today, our culture, the entire world, that has you tied up in knots, that has your underclothings in a bind, that's really scaring you? So what is it about which you are wringing your hands these days, that you're biting your fingernails over? I've got several options for you, and again, this will feel like deja vu all over again, because every once in a while we just have to open our eyes to the reality of man's plans. Just so we know, just so we're aware. I was watching an interview with Dr. Scott Atlas. You probably don't know who he is. He's a phenomenal man as far as his intelligence. He is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. He was a professor there for some 25 years over health and medicine, things like that. He was involved in a lot of the conversations during COVID with Dr. Anthony Fauci. And he recounted an amazing conversation I want to relate to you. He's at this round table with Dr. Fauci and a few other people. Dr. Fauci said this: the problem is the public is not afraid enough. To which Dr. Atlas leaned forward and said, excuse me, what did you just say? This was Fauci's chance to say, oh, nothing, I didn't mean that. No, he doubled down. He doubled down and he said, that's the problem. The people are not afraid enough. They won't listen. Fear. He just said it. Fear is the key here. Isn't that amazing? The plans of men? Is that not what that all was about? Was fear? And he articulated it. Now, whether you're wringing your hands about the data centers springing up everywhere, which we know are not data centers, they're actually surveillance centers, or it's the bioweapons. We know that they're constantly working on bioweapons, of course, and there's straight out terrorism. They had the big UFC fight on the front lawn of the White House last Sunday. I won't even get into that. But evidently there was a great terrorist plot to destroy the people there that they foiled once again. Wile E. Coyote and his Acme. Then there's the World War III that's coming any time, right, with nuclear weapons. And of course, the attacks on our food supply and our water supply. Add to that weather manipulation, which we know goes on for whatever reason. Add to that EMPs, we've talked about those electronic magnetic pulses that could take us back to the Stone Age in an instant. We have the grooming and abduction of children that is tragic and horrifying, that goes on all the time. Hundreds of thousands of children are victims of this. There's the AI thing that's coming that scares a lot of people. And there's the psychological mind warfare that goes on. And finally, for good measure, 15-minute cities. You know what those are, right? 15-minute cities. It's a control measure, so that those who are in charge can tell us when and where and what we can do and how much money we can spend. You've probably heard of the Lone Star ticks. We don't have them around here, but we will eventually, probably. The Lone Star ticks. Evidently, those ticks have been injected with something that will give you alpha-gal syndrome. That's a weird name, isn't it? Alpha-gal. But that eventually makes you allergic to red meat. Wonder why that's in the works. A paper in the Journal of Bioethics by Western Michigan University had professors saying that this Lone Star tick, they have a moral obligation to spread a disease where people can't eat red meat. Not long ago, the CEO for Nokia told the World Economic Forum that by 2030, the smartphone as we know it will be inside the human body. To which our friend Elon Musk said it's Jesus-like. Won't that be great? It'd be like having Jesus in us, only it's a phone that, does what it does. China just approved the first commercial brain chip, and of course, Microsoft holds the patent number 060606 to harvest biometric energy from the human body to mine cryptocurrency. Man is always up to something, isn't he? What are we to do? You can tell by now, this lesson is about not man's plans, but the providence of God. God will use anyone, anytime, for any purpose to accomplish His will. I want to conclude with what I think is the best movie that has come out in the last many years. And it is something I seldom tell you you should watch a movie. I often talk about movies, but seldom do I tell you need to watch a movie. You need to watch this movie. It's called The Great Awakening. In summary, it's about the friendship that emerged between two very unlikely men. And that is Dr. Benjamin Franklin and the evangelist from England, George Whitefield. There is a scene that I've got to tell you about, in case you don't see it, but I'm going to spoil it for you. This scene is a cool one. George Whitefield arrives on the shores of America in 1739. And there's a buzz about the fact that the evangelist has come. And he's not just come to anywhere in America. Right away, he has arrived in Philadelphia. Well, that's where Benjamin Franklin lives, of course. Benjamin Franklin was a cynic when it came to belief in God. He simply couldn't bring himself to believe. He was a scientist, and he simply couldn't bring himself to believe in God, even though he'd grown up in a home that believed in God. But one day, when George Whitefield shows up on the scene, there's a frenzy, and a huge crowd congregates on the main street. And so Benjamin Franklin's printing shop is right on that street, so he walks out, and he is in awe of the crowd, and in awe of the voice of George Whitefield. He's never heard anything like it. In typical Benjamin Franklin fashion, he begins to calculate how many people could possibly be hearing this one man, and his calculations bring him to 30,000, which is very cool, because I'm sure you've thought, as I've thought, how did Jesus teach thousands and thousands of people? My guess is his voice boomed like George Whitefield's voice. But that fascinated Benjamin Franklin to the point where when the crowd broke up after the sermon, he wanted to meet this famous evangelist, mostly because he wanted to do a headline about him and make money off of him in his papers. However, the crowd didn't make it possible for him to get to George Whitefield, but he did see his associate who had set up this meeting place, and so he asked him, could I see George Whitefield? And the man, not knowing who he was talking to, said, no, his schedule's booked. He's really got a full schedule, it won't be possible. And at that moment, someone calls out to Benjamin Franklin and says, Dr. Franklin, and asks him a question. Now the associate of George Whitefield says, are you Benjamin Franklin? He says, yes, I am. He said, Mr. Whitefield wants to meet with you. It's one of the things he wants to do the very most. Could he meet with you? And so they set up a meeting. But in that moment, the associate of George Whitefield looks at him and he says, this was providential. To which Benjamin Franklin responds, or coincidental. Do you see the difference between a mind that's blinded and one that accepts the providence of God in our lives? History tells us that George Whitefield had a powerful and lasting impact on Benjamin Franklin. And again, if you're in our upper room groups, I implore you to watch this and especially pay attention to the very last scene, where it's an accurate rendition of Benjamin Franklin's speech to the Continental Congress. I say all that to tell you that God is a God of providence. And He had His hand in the beginning of our nation, and He has His hand in the lives of people like David and Paul and you and me. I take you back one more time to Psalm 56, verse 3. But when I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. I praise God for what He has promised. I trust in God. So why should I be afraid? What can mere mortals do to me? 2 points David made. Number 1, I do fear. Can you relate to that? But I don't stay in fear. I put all my trust in God because he's a God of providence. He can be trusted. Isn't that great? What a great story this is, a true story. I pray that you've been encouraged knowing that God has his hand in everything, and man's will, man's plots, man's plans dissolve in the face of God's providence. We love you. Thanks for doing the journey with us. God bless you.